Hello, everyone. This is the SEBA call for December 11th, 2018. We have a few items on the agenda today. First, we wanted to review Jira blockers for the December 1.0 release of SEBA. And then we wanted to have a discussion of the release process and how we're defining components in SEBA and the overall core platform, how that relates to SEBA. So I'm going to jump over to Jira to begin with. So we have quite a few items that are either high priority. The intended release date for the 1.0 is the 18th, so that's a week from today. There is going to be a demo on that day of these components, so we wanted to go over and make sure that everything here is either in scope, or if there are things that are out of scope or that need to be raised or lowered in priority, that's done. So I'm going to start, I guess we're going to start and go over the items and see what the status is of each of these. The first item is Scott's SEBA 357 VOLT service campaign.
Sure. Yeah, I need to spend some time talking this one over with Matteo and Sarah. The issue that we're having is that we can't pull OLT devices from Volta and create them in XOS because we need to know the uplink port. And the only place we learn the uplink port from is the SADIS server, which in turn gets it from XOS. So there's a circular dependency if we try to go that route. So I think we need to talk over offline what the intended workflow is for pulling those from Volta.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Your message, I think there's a way to do that, but let's take this offline.
Yeah, it's probably more than we want to dive into right now.
Okay, thanks, Scott and Matteo. There's also the next item is SEBA 373. This is how we're going to document SEBA, the 1.0 release on the guide. We've had some discussion of this. Larry, do you have comments on that?
Well, it's kind of related to the whole release strategy, but the premise is that SEBA 1.0 is a self-contained standalone thing. It happens to have to leverage some things that are in Chord, and we have a pretty elaborate Chord guide. So the tentative thinking plan is to reduce the Chord guide to that which is generic and profile, like for example SEBA independent, and then add a profile guide, which could be standalone, but for the time being we'll just make it one of the guides within the larger Chord guide, and put all SEBA specific stuff there. That'd be SEBA specific installation instructions, the SEBA specific configuration and management and operations instructions, and so on. So that's the gist of the idea. But once we start down that path, we might find there's other things that we want to do. And by the way, this would be in keeping with SEBA being the first of these examples, but we will follow on with an M-Chord release once we get the licenses cleaned up with the EPC, and there could be other self-contained profiles that people can build over time.
Okay, thanks, Larry. The next item was 365. Do we have anyone from the Foundry here? This is one of Don Newton's items. I think I've talked to Don about this, and what's going on, I think, is that he has a prerequisite in the abstract OLT that they changed out from under him, so we're looking at using a different way of managing dependencies so that doesn't happen to that code in the future. The next item, 366, currently when we changed some things about the console logging output, it eliminated the date and the log level from the console logs. This data was still put in the Kafka logs that were pushed to Elasticsearch. So I have a patch that I'm working on to restore that functionality. Next item was BBSIM documentation on the guide. Matteo, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of self-explaining.
Yeah.
We need to write some documentation about how to use BBC monopod and what are your options.
Right. So documentation is mostly next week.
Okay. 371, releasing ONOS 1.13.
That's actually done. I just released this version this morning, so we're good to go. I haven't closed it yet, but I'll close it right away.
Okay, that sounds good. And 286.
Yeah, so I started looking at this yesterday. This was I thought it was a race condition that Don found, but the origin of this is actually that ONOS is throwing a null pointer exception in some cases. I'm looking at that. I think I have a way to solve it, but I need to look into that deeper.
Okay, thanks, Matteo. 304, Andy?
Right. This is about when the subscriber changes back to awaiting auth state to clean up some stale state. It's a pretty small fix. I should have it done in a couple of hours.
Okay, thanks, Andy. 372 is me. This is another. So once I update the logging, and there are a few other issues we're having with the with logs not being output in certain cases, which we think I've been working with Scott to see if is thread related. We need to update the core and then have all the service synchronizers that use the XOS core updated. So this would follow on after the 366 work and that other work. And the next item, SEBA 230, the charts.opencore.org, the index. Currently, when new charts are published on a branch, the old charts are removed from the charts.opencore.org index. We want to have older charts available so we can have dependency on something other than the newest in the tip of the code release. So I'm working on writing up scripts to change that build or that publish process. The next item, SEBA 344. I think a lot of these are Shads. Is Shad there?
No, but I can take it. So I looked at this a lot yesterday, and it seems like this crept into Volta around November, early November. I currently suspect some changes that Craig from Tell Labs had made. So this problem is in Volta 1.6 as well as Volta Master. And I'm just investigating it some more to probably bring it to the Volta mailing list's attention sometime today.
Okay, thanks, Saurav. Next item is 336. I think this is BBSim had a fork of the OpenOLT adapter. We're trying to switch it back to using the mainstream one.
I think
this is done, but it needs to be tested on the pod just to make sure we have everything working.
Okay. 347. Own user stuck in restoring OMCI state.
This is actually in Volta Master, so that's why it's not. It's high priority, but not marked as a blocker.
Right.
Because the SEBA release is going to use Volta 1.6. It doesn't seem to be the case in 1.6. So I don't think we have investigated this because the priority is 1.6 right now.
Right. The next items are all just high priority. We can look over them. They're minor things like UI freeze and slowdown that we've been trying to work through. I think the slowdown might be dealt with, but I'm not sure. If Circont or Circont got to the bottom of that. The last two are backup and restore and updating versions of components. Those are, if we get to those, that'd be nice, but I don't think they're required for the release. So it looks like we have quite a few items, but I think most of them are either in flight or we have a pretty good idea of how to solve them, which is probably pretty good for the. I think we'll probably hit the next Tuesday with all these complete. So the next item on the agenda was how do we go about releasing the SEBA 1.0? So over the last couple of days, people have made a short presentation about that, of how we we define and release individual components of Cord. So I'm going to switch to the first slide. Saurav or Larry, would you like to talk about this?
Well, I can. This is just a pretty high-level picture of the pieces that go into a particular configuration of all these components. So you could think of there being an umbrella thing called Cord here, but that's really a little bit beside the point. You configure for SEBA, for example, you configure some platform pieces. You profile specific, and this is just using some language we've been using, which is that SEBA is a profile of a particular set of services. And then it turns out, we've learned from SEBA that there are workflows. We have the AT&T workflow. So any one configuration would be a combination of some platform components, some profile components, and some workflow components. And just to pick a word, you can think of that bundle as a solution, which also, of course, includes some details about what the physical hardware is going to be, the BOM. Yeah, I think the next slide just gives you some words to say that. This is really just a way of thinking about SEBA, which might help us shape how we release it. And it's kind of keeping in mind that after we release SEBA, there will be additional workflows that we may want to release with a fairly common but not necessarily identical set of profile pieces. There will be completely different profiles coming. MCord is an example, and maybe somewhere down the line there'll be a profile that has both SEBA and MCord services intermixed because we're trying to do multi-access. Yeah, this third slide, I think maybe is probably the last one we really need to look at. It's, again, just showing you a specific example of what the SEBA release is going to be. So the connection to Cord is that we did 6 releases of Cord, and each one of those had bundled into it, say, RCord, eCord, and MCord. But with 6.0, we're to a point that these profiles can be completely independent, standalone things. And SEBA is our first example. And so we can do a SEBA 1.0 release without any consideration whatsoever for the rest of Cord, except, well, Cord's where all the documentation is, and the Cord repository is where all the code is. And so we're just trying to plan this release in a way that will let us repeat it and not just treat this as a one-off. Yeah, what else is, and these are just some words that were, some definitions we're trying to roughly define, some terminology so that we can talk about this in a reasonable way. Yeah, I think, let me stop there and just see where the discussion goes.
So are there any questions about how we're defining this? I think if we go back to the slide that talks about the different components, what we have is the workflow defines like the business logic and the behavior of it. So for example, currently we have an AT&T workflow. We've talked to Turk Telecom in the past. They have a slightly different workflow, but they're using a lot of the same profile and platform components. So that's sort of the division of business logic and behavior from the rest of the profile.
So what you, just to interject for a second on that point, what you might think of is what we're releasing 1.0. We can call it SEBA 1.0, which is fine, but it might be more accurate to think of it as qualified in the following way: SEBA 1.0 with the AT&T workflow, because we could actually release with a no-op workflow, I guess, and then that could be a release. It could technically be a SEBA release that has no workflow in it. We could have little reference workflows that maybe did some toy things. We've sort of had versions of that earlier.
I think for us, the thing we need to do is to set in stone the platform component version we are going to use for the SEBA release. We already know them. They are already released because everything is already tagged. We just need to release them somewhere. Then I will say we release the SEBA profile and AT&T workflow. So tomorrow, if another workflow comes on that want to be based on SEBA 1.0, the only thing we need to do is to release the new workflow without changing anything else.
Yeah, so that's a really important point, which is because of the way everything's organized, just because we declare something, whatever, SEBA 1.0, all of these components are independent and can be installed independently with the appropriate Helm charts. And so we're no longer in a world where everything is lockstep, but it's convenient at different points to declare a snapshot of those components as something that we all, checkpointed basically, and that's kind of what the SEBA 1.0 would be. It's not SEBA locked forever, it's just a checkpoint so that we have a common, a tagged reference point in case we need to go back to it and talk about deltas.
Hi, Larry, this is Sriju. Just one confusion, to realize the AT&T workflow, we have made changes in the profile components, and so going forward, say if we have a generic release of say RCOD 7.0 or something, so does the same profile works? So ideally, it should work for anything, including RCOD 6.0 or 7.0.
Well, so no, not so. Yeah, that's a really good question. This profile is a self-contained thing. It may be a lot similar to another profile. It may be defined by using 80% of the subcomponents and changing the last 20%. But if you did that, it would be a different. Again, this is where we need a word for it, because I've been using the word profile to talk about the full configuration, but now profile is a little bit more narrowly defined. And so let's just use the word solution for a word to hang on here. So this particular release will be exactly one solution. There could be many others that are very, very similar, but not exactly the same because they changed the workflow, or maybe they changed one service in the profile. From Chord's perspective, we could do a Chord release that happened to say, at this moment in time, there are 5 solutions that are tested and legit and whatever the criteria are, and we could stamp out Chord 7.0, and we could say it currently supports 5 solutions.
All right.
And RCORD may or may not be one of them, MCORD may or may not be one of them. Now, the interesting question is, when do we do that next? That's a Chord TST question, and one answer is, well, let's wait for MCORD, so at least we have 2 of them, and we could call that 7.0. Or maybe we have 3 because we have a variant of SEBA. And this now becomes not a strategic thing, but actually more of a pragmatic thing. It may make sense to declare let's just call it 6.1 of Chord, which includes the SEBA solution, simply because we want to get off master. We want to tag something and not call it master.
Okay.
Hopefully that answered the bigger question a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I understand. Always, the picture will have some exceptions with respect to what modifications we do to the profile to serve a workflow. Yeah, I understand that exceptions. Yes.
One of the other things we did discuss is whether for each profile, you may want to load so for example, there's always been talk of multi-access, and in that case, you might have multiple profiles. One which is like the RCord hardline profile, and one which might be mobile. So you could have those coexist on top of a single platform, and maybe each profile would have its own workflow, but you wouldn't, for example, have the AT&T workflow and the Turk Telecom workflow both working on one profile at a time. So it's sort of, we have a mapping of single workflow onto a profile, but multiple profiles being able to be loaded into a solution.
Got it.
So
it's just a shift in terminology, and none of this was ever, cast in stone, and I keep tripping over it, so you might hear me say things the wrong way. Is I had thought of profile as the root of what you would release, and now profile has become a sub piece of the thing that you would release, and we really need to settle on a name for the whole ball of wax, and that's where kind of threw the word solution in there, which is actually consistent with some terminology that's on the wiki, but it is a little different than the way we've been talking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Larry.
okay, well, we've been over the 2 items we discussed. Are there any other things people would like to bring up for the release process, or about that they want to bring to the attention of the group?
Yeah, Zach, one more question. Like, I don't think right now we don't have a SEBA bill of materials, so we are going to add it before December 18th, or?
Are you talking about just like documentation of which ONUs
Yeah.
and OLTs and those sorts of things are supported? I think some of those have been added to master, but I am not sure.
Okay, all right.
Some
Okay.
definition needs to be there, even if it's
Right. That's a good point. We should add that as another documentation task.
Yes.
Before the release. So
Because I mean, right now, like I'm sure, like most people will be referring to the RCode bill of materials, which is quite heavy compared to SEBA.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. If there aren't any other topics, we'll just be looking forward to the next meeting, which is on the 18th, and there should be a demo at that time of the what's going to be released as part of SEBA 1.0. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.